A few months ago, I did a menopause talk for a company, and they offered me a health scan in return, which I thought I was going to ace. But it turned out I had a benign brain tumour called a colloid cyst, which is very rare, 3 in a million. It's big for the space. It fills the space. It's 14 millimetres wide, and it needs to come out because if it grows, it would be bad. So I'm having it removed via a craniotomy. They go through the top of my head here and through the two halves of my brain to the middle, get the cyst, take it out, empty it, take it out. Bob's your uncle. So say a prayer for me.
The words of TV celebrity Davina McCall when she revealed on Instagram she was at that very moment undergoing complex surgery to remove a 14mm benign tumour sitting right in the middle of her brain. Jeffrey, as Davina named her rare colloidal cyst, was discovered on a routine health scan and left the star facing difficult decisions. Leave it and risk possible sudden death, or go under the knife. Thankfully, Davina is making an incredible recovery and has just revealed she's had her final MRI scan and has the all clear. On this week's Convex Conversation, we meet the man she credits for saving her life in a 5-hour operation and who she says will be a friend for life. Consultant neurosurgeon Kevin O'Neill likened the procedure to defusing a bomb, and I'm delighted to say he's taken time out to share his story and also his work, raising money and awareness for much-needed brain tumour research through the Brain Tumour Research Campaign, which will feature next week. Kevin, it is amazing to meet you. You have rather been thrust into the limelight. You've been on my coffee table on the front page of the Times in your scrubs, chatting to Lorraine on ITV. Has this been quite a whirl for you over the last few months?
It's been definitely a journey. It's been a sort of baptism into social media. Being long in a tooth, it's not something I'm used to using, but I had to adopt it very rapidly when Davina threatened to out me on Instagram. So I rapidly got an Instagram account and I've quite a big following within about 3 hours, so it's quite funny.
That's incredible. Have you had some stick from your colleagues? Because you were looking a little bit James Bond-esque on the front page of the Times, in your scrubs, back to back with Davina looking all kind of gorgeous and sexy in a little frock. Yeah,
again, that was another surprise. She said, come for a photo shoot, and she mentioned the Saturday Times. I thought, what's the Saturday Times? Oh, you mean the Times? And I didn't realise it was the mainstream paper. But yeah, on the day, I kind of regret that analogy with the bomb disposal. I've been getting a lot of jibes from my colleagues about that, but in the heat of the moment you're thinking, what is the analogy for something like this? My thinking was that at the time you just, when you're having to journey to the centre of the brain, so to speak, you have to go through so many layers, so many kind of risky things. So the other analogy is like an Indiana Jones Temple of Doom kind of thing, getting through all these hazards, let's say, until you get to the target. But I did get a few jibes.
I think, though, this is such an alien world to so many people, your world, and I think it can only do good that you spoke about it in such honest terms. I noticed Davina put on her Instagram when she thanked the Times, thank you for printing what we said, because often people do articles and they're misquoted. But it was a fascinating read, and surely that will help others in different stages of this dreadful journey that people face.
Well, I hope it does. I hope it takes some of the worry out of it. The first thing I said on that Lorraine programme actually was that people shouldn't be worried about this because, the most severe cases, and this is a benign lesion, are quite rare. And to go through what Davina went through and all the anguish of kind of making a decision about what to do is going to be unlikely. Anybody's going to have to face that. But nonetheless, if you do, the lesson is that there is a way through it. And at the end of the day, you can come through this like any other challenge. Well, not unscathed, but, you can be a better person at the end of it.
She is an incredible woman, isn't she?
She is. What you see, she wears a heart on her sleeve. She is how you see her. So she's a larger-than-life personality and very emotional, very, very loving, very caring, very empathetic. And she won't mind me saying, but, before you undertake an operation like this was picked up on a scan, one of those screening scans that she had. I think it was a gift, and she thought she had aced it, as she said, because she's a very healthy person. She looks after herself incredibly well. And this is one of those things that no matter how much training you do, this is almost probably stems back to development. So this may have been in the making since she was a baby, and it's just grown over her lifetime, but become a threat.
When you hear the word benign tumour, you think perhaps it isn't a threat. But it was a really interesting decision for Davina to have to make, a life-changing decision, because as you say, it could have been there since she was born. As far as I'm aware, she wasn't experiencing any symptoms. So that's a really difficult choice, isn't it, to make, that maybe one day you could keel over and die, but maybe you won't.
Obviously, it's the toughest decision for her, but, as a surgeon, it's quite a tough decision. You have to come down on one side of the fence or the other. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is ascertain the natural history of her condition and whether that's a threat to her, if we leave it alone, or whether we have to deal with that and take away that threat. And the second question is taking away that threat a greater or lesser risk than leaving it alone? This is the kind of process that's going on inside my head when I'm assessing her. So to try and make that easier, we did actually do some tests on her, and we found that she probably was a bit symptomatic from it. She actually says this herself, that when she had the operation, she kind of woke up a little bit and started thinking. So she was so used to thinking and her brain being very active in the background, and that started to wane a little bit, which I think she put down to perhaps the menopause. But if it disappeared with the operation, it may well have been due to that. And the good thing is that on one of the tests, she was like Mensa level on non-verbal reasoning. So
she's probably put that on Instagram.
That. But on that basis, and the fact that it was a bit too big to leave, it was getting to a size, so anything over 10 millimeters. I think it may have been even bigger than 14 millimeters, but it's starting to stretch things, starting to block the pathways for fluid to flow in that natural system. And if that starts to dam up and you get an obstruction, then that's when all the havoc can be reaped. So pretty much happy that we did the right thing. We got rid of it. The latest scan looks amazing, as she's expounded on social media again, but you couldn't want for a better result, to be honest. And she is completely functional.
We thought we'd post a final brain operation update.
Absolutely. It's good news.
Yes, it is. So last week I had my final MRI, and I was a bit nervous about it because I knew that if any of it was left, then it would grow back and I'd just go through the whole thing again, which I was prepared to do. I kind of mentally prepared myself for that.
I was also very nervous about it. Yeah, of course, because it's been
massive,
a huge journey. So, yeah.
But it was clear.
How did you feel when you looked at that latest MRI, when I suppose you realised as well that there's the all clear? Because what really touched me was when she said she talked herself into, if I need to do all this again, I will. And I didn't even realise, just as a punter and a member of the public, that could even be an option.
Yeah. Well, you see, as a surgeon, I'm armed with a bit of knowledge. So in many ways, for me, I was looking at a scan with my own trepidation because, no matter how well you do and how well that operation goes, there's always, in medicine, we need to say never, because there's always a chance that there may have been a remnant there, something that could have re-emerged. And I gave her enough time for things to settle down. So what we were going to look at this stage was going to be, as she said, the kind of final arbiter. And fortunately, I had a look at it before she had a chance to.
Did you tell her that?
And it was absolutely perfect. So I was very happy. So I had a big smile on my face when I saw that scan. Yeah.
You described yourself, I think, as an empath in the Times article. How important is it for you to have an emotional connection with your patient, which, I've met Davina many a time through telly, and it's not difficult to strike up a relationship with Davina, but how important is that for you, that you've got a real connection with the people that you're doing surgery like this for?
I think it's impossible not to have a connection with Davina. She's just one of those who connects with everybody. But I think generally, from my perspective, doctors are often described as being cold and distant. To a certain extent, that may be a coping mechanism to keep bad news at bay. But for me, I've just learned through my career that you have to make a degree of connection with the patient to really understand their perspective on things. And until you understand that, you can't really guide them through the fine nuances of their pathway to their satisfaction. You have to keep them happy and keep their expectations met. And in terms of how far you go with explanations, I try and be as detailed as I can. But, what I pride myself in is that, when I have a patient who is scared, witless, so they're kind of paralyzed, they can't make a decision, they've got a condition that they don't know much about, but they come in and after the consultation, they go out feeling a degree of happiness about where they're going now, even though their underlying diagnosis may not be the best, but because they've got a connection and they have to feel like they're being looked after. And you can't do that unless you make some degree of connection with them. So
they need to feel, don't they, that they're in trusted hands, and that the next step in this journey, they feel as safe as they're able to be, I suppose.
The other side of the coin, everything in life is about balance. And when you're talking about doctor-patient relationship. It's a mutual thing. As a doctor, I can't be looking at a clinic and thinking, oh, this is going to be an arduous. I have to enjoy the interaction with my patients and make sure that actually enjoying what I'm doing and making connection with patients and seeing the reward in that and seeing them get better, seeing them enjoy the pathway that you're taking them on. For me, it is all part of it. So, yeah.
If I promise not to mention bomb disposal ever again in your company, will you talk us through, obviously, in layman's terms, the surgery and what you were faced with?
Yeah. For want of a better description, there's always 101 ways to skin a cat. So the key to neurosurgery, a lot of neurosurgery is obviously because you're working on a very eloquent, sensitive organ, is the approach you take. My job is to get this cyst out without damaging the brain around it. So the first starting point for me was to find a route where I've got control over it and I'm going through the least amount of normal brain, causing the least amount of damage. And so I chose a particular route where you go between the hemispheres of the brain and there's just one small connection, a little bit of brain about less than half a centimetre you have to get through to get to the ventricle where this thing's sitting. So I chose that, but it's a route that is open, and I chose that because the other route would mean going through a lot of normal brain, either open or through an endoscopic approach. When you weigh up the pros and cons, in my judgment, I felt it was just the better route, because if you go with an endoscope, you're going slightly blindly initially and you have a risk of leaving some of that behind. And it increases your risk of having seizures afterwards because you're having to go through normal kind of functional brain where there's an epileptogenic potential. So weighing it all up, I chose this approach. So in essence, you have to make a window in the skull. You have to get the scalp out of the way. You make a window in the skull. Do you want me to go into graphic detail?
Well, in detail, just so we understand as laymen, I suppose.
Okay. So the skull is actually quite easy to reflect, as you know from tales of Indian scalping cowboys.
I love the way you make this so normal and easy to understand.
But you make an incision in the scalp and it will reflect. There's a layer that's very loosely connected to, and you can reflect that. And then you have one small layer and then you have the skull, and we have to drill through that. And we drill through it in such a way that the drill doesn't penetrate unsafely beyond the inner table of the skull. And then we kind of then strip the inner lining, which is a very tough membrane called the dura, which protects the brain, lines the cavity of the skull. And then you do a little kind of like rotary jiggly saw, cut out a bit of bone, and then you have to reflect that dural membrane to expose the brain. And when you do that, you have to be careful about venous, large veins that traverse and go through that membrane, particularly one right in the middle, because we were going midline, so that had to be avoided and reflected. And then you have to gently tease the hemispheres apart, and you use a bit of gravity to help you. And then you have blood vessels that supply the brain in your way. So it's like it's going through a jungle of hazards. And then you're faced with this part of the brain that connects the two hemispheres and separates where I'm coming from the ventricle, with the fluid-filled cavity. The two cavities where the cyst is sitting at the confluence of those, right in the midline. And so they're often asymmetric. So one on the left, I had to go from the left-hand side, which happens to be in most people the dominant side of their brain. So I had to go on the left, and we're in there. And then you've got a very bright microscope illuminating what's becoming a deeper and deeper distant dark hole. And there's a cyst. It sits there like a little slightly green-filled cyst.
Jeffrey. It was Jeffrey.
Jeffrey in his smoking jacket and pipe. And it's the key, however, here is that's fine. You got there, you got to that stage, but the cyst is still there. And the problem about removing it is that it's sitting in like an arch, which forms the window where the two ventricles connect. And the roof of that arch is a very delicate structure called the fornix. And the fornix is connected to short-term memory circuits. So if that's even breathed upon or injured, your short-term memory can completely go.
And that was one of many risks that you had to weigh up, wasn't it, for Davina, the short-term memory?
Yeah. Obviously, being a TV presenter, you're entirely reliant on that. You know, that's your modus operandi. So that was a scary bit for me. When I got to that bit, I was having to sort of pause and think, how am I going to do this? But luckily, it went very well. I managed to gently separate. And then the key is not to try and be brave and take this thing out en bloc, but to do the safest thing. So, the safest thing, in my view at the time, and I've done it before many times, is just to deflate the cyst, take all that mucin, get the cyst, which is a tougher thing you can grab hold of, and then just gently tease it away without having to stretch anything, and then cut it gently, and that's it, end of the operation.
Make it sound really easy.
Yeah.
It's not like the operation game I used to play as a kid,
No.
which I used to find quite tricky, actually.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's a balance of nerves and your knowledge and your dexterity. But in the end, I said to her partner, Michael, it was a beautiful textbook operation and it went really well.
He seems like he's been a wonderful, wonderful support. I love them on Instagram, the pair of them. I mean, they're both mad as a box of snakes sometimes, but he's great. He's great fun, and I would imagine he's been
I do love both their personalities.
A wonderful support.
Yeah.
He makes a good hairdryer, by the way, in case you need a new hairdryer.
Oh, I think he's promised me one.
Well, I think you want to make sure you get one. They come in lovely Farrow and Ball type colours, so make sure he gives you one in each one. What's the atmosphere like for you when you're in theatre? Are you a surgeon who likes a bit of music in the background? Is it all very quiet? Obviously, the pressure's on in all of your brain surgery. It doesn't matter who your patient is.
Yeah. I'll be totally honest with you. Some people like silence to focus, and sometimes you do need that, but it's always balancing stress with performance. There is this dynamic with stress and performance. So stress actually improves performance to a certain extent until it becomes excessive, and then it paralyzes you and it gives you the shakes and things. So you've got to have mechanisms to control that. And one of them is to put some music on. I mean, not so much in the kind of stressy situations like Davina's, but in other operations where it's more day to day, I would put music on just to keep myself in balance, so to speak, and keep myself motivated.
Actually, what kind of music?
Oh,
what kind of music? Here's a good one.
I'll be. I'm
Taylor Swift going on, or
I would say it's fairly eclectic, but I do.
That's cheating.
I do like to. No, I tell you what, I do like to hark back to like 70s and 80s a little bit.
70s, not that obviously I can remember the 70s because I'm only 37.
There you go.
The 70s were great. I mean, what a great era for music.
I'm always trying to teach the younger ones in theatre, who's who, and
yeah, but they're playing now in the modern music. They're playing all the riffs and all the old stuff from ABBA and all sorts of bands from the. I'm sure you weren't listening to ABBA in the theatre.
Oh, I was. I love ABBA.
Well, yeah, I love ABBA too. Did you go and see the live show?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
it was
twice
amazing,
now.
Wasn't it? Twice. Just tell me about that. We'll move on from Davina in a minute and talk more generally about research and your charity and how you became a surgeon. But what was it like in the days afterwards? When's the point when you know that hopefully things have gone well? Because I think I remember reading there's a bit of air, isn't there, in the brain from opening up the head like that. Yeah. So when's that point when you think, gosh, actually, I think this has been really successful?
Well, of course, I think you can't judge in the first 24, 40 hours because, even with the most perfect operations, things happen, things switch off. And, we know from days of old when before CT, way before my days, I must say, but before CT and MRI, in order to visualise the brain, they would often go into that fluid-filled cavity and inject air and take x-rays to see if there's any blockage or deviation. But it took a big toll on the patient. It's very irritative to have air in there. And so obviously when you're going into a fluid-filled cavity, air's going to get in. That will dissolve quite quickly. But as a result of that, things aren't supported by the buoyancy of the fluid and the function goes off. So in the first 24 hours, it's a nerve-wracking time. And she herself told you she gave us all a fright because she was away with the fairies a little bit, but in a way it's to be expected. Some people surprise me and they come through things like the biggest operations in the world. They come through things as if you've not touched them. Some people with minor things look like they've been hit by a train. So it's difficult to tell, but I knew that the operation had gone well and that everything would go away. When we did our first scan, there was a little bit of air, she said. That takes its toll on you. That has to kind of take time to dissolve and go away. And as that did, she just resurfaced like she described. But all the first 24 hours for the surgeon and patient are always slightly nerve-wracking.
So I suppose it begs the question, how on earth did you go down this route in the first place? What was it as a young man, Kevin, that led you down the neurosurgeon route and also spinal surgery, I think you do as well?
Yeah, that's right. I've always been blessed and lucky, I think, blessed to be here today and to look after Davina and have wonderful Wendy and Sarah here.
I know, we don't normally have an audience. Wendy's part 2 of this, which is great.
Also blessed with just a general sense of having a calling. I knew what I was going to do since I was a little boy, and I was always fascinated by how things work, but particularly the human condition, human body, and the brain, being the sort of pinnacle of that system. And I remember in the days of just encyclopedias, my dad was given a gift of man and medicine. I would be constantly opening up and looking at the brain. And so I kind of had this inkling of where I was going very early on. I was always known I've got 2 sisters and a brother, always known as the kind of the doctor in inverted commas of the family, because I'd always be diagnosing their ailments and giving them solutions, even from an early age. So it's something that was in me, and I just followed my path.
And were there doctors in your family or not? Were you following in anybody's footsteps?
No, my dad was a carpenter, but interestingly...
Oh gosh, actually that doesn't go down...
I should have been an orthopaedic surgeon. But the interesting thing is that my dad was adopted, and it turns out that his real family were medical. in fact, in neurology profession. So
how interesting.
There must be something
in there.
That's something I'm looking into. There's a story in there.
Yeah.
Quite an interesting story on my dad's side, and how that transcends through the generations. I remember him telling me the story, and I was always looking out for the name of this guy in medical texts and stuff. And it turns out he's quite famous preeminent neurologist in the 20s, and the editor of Brain. But I'll say no more about that. That's another tale.
Well, that is another tale. Yeah. And also when you get some time back, because I would imagine that your phone and Instagram have been going crazy. I think a lot of former patients have contacted you too to say congratulations, haven't they, and pass on their well wishes. So I'm imagining life's fairly busy at the minute.
Yeah, that again is another blessing, because you get so caught up in the heat of things and the conveyor belt of what you do. Sometimes it's nice just to hear back from patients, that not even in the dim and distant past, even the recent ones, just to remind you actually of the good work that you've done and the thanks that they have for you. That's very touching.
How do you cope with the pressure and stress, because you have got people's lives literally in your hands, and on the sad occasions when patients are lost, it's not often the surgeon at fault. Sometimes there are situations, aren't there, in tumours that people don't survive from, whatever you do. I lost my best school friend last year to a glioblastoma, stage 4, and she was diagnosed with epilepsy, and 6 months later she was dead. And so I have a little bit of, I don't
personal
think,
connection.
Yeah, and she had surgery, and the surgeon said, "You're not going to live. I hope to extend your life." So how do you cope? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sort of reveal that, but how do you cope with the stress and pressure? I know it's what you do for a living, Kevin, and I know you've spent years and years and years training to do this. But nevertheless, you're still a human, and you still go home at night. And how do you decompress? That was a very long question, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, first of all, again, it's about balance, isn't it? I mean, I think you have to have that drive and motivation, and it comes on the back of what you just said, something where there's a problem that really needs to be solved. And I think at heart, I'm a inquisitive problem solver. I've gone through a process of learning, both on how to solve the problem and do the surgery as best as I can with as least complications as possible. But at the same time, you're right, dealing with things that might go wrong people can very easily lose their confidence and ability, and therefore capability. And I've gone through a process of trying to learn from things. Luckily for me, I haven't had much go wrong, but it's because of the way I approach things. But in answer to your question, how do I decompress? I think now it could become second nature over 30 years of practice. I find it much easier to deal with neurosurgery than, say, I don't know, working out a new computer app or whatever. But I like to listen to music. You have to surround yourself by things that calm you and make you happy. Like, the way I see it is that people that come to me are usually got into a state of extreme imbalance with a disease or something like that. And it takes an extreme solution to solve it. And I just have to keep going back to a place of peace for me. So I'm fortunate to have a lovely house, which is a little bit rural. So as soon as I get home, I go sit down in my little snug, look out the window, and all I can see is trees, cherry trees at the moment, blossoming, which is good, and a nice garden, and listen to music and just detach myself from the stress in some way. I do meditation. I realise that the balances in life are very, very closely related to health. So I try and keep myself healthy. I try and exercise, try not to eat too much of the wrong food. So all the things I keep telling my patients to do, I'm actually practicing what I preach. But
do you think as you get older as well that it's those simple things that make a real difference? I think as I've got older, life was very chaotic in telly and young children, and it was very full on. But now it's the really simple things. It's the getting up at the crack of dawn and being in Richmond Park, watching the sunrise with a flask of tea or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you think life perhaps, we're similar age ballpark? So I wonder if you feel that those simple things are really important.
I think they are. I think that to a certain extent we're programmed in a way that in modern society we're not living according to that program, and we're all suffering as a result, either mental or physical illness. And I think what you're describing sounds like what they call mindfulness, where you're starting to appreciate your surroundings, particularly natural surroundings, which you're designed to be in and you're designed to appreciate and you're designed to benefit from. But we let it pass us by every day. So, when you ask me how do I de-stress, I just kind of revert back to what you've just described, starting just to go home and appreciate everything you've got and be grateful for it and be grateful for the natural things in life.
I struggled with meditation, but I guess sitting on a log with a flask of tea is the same kind of thing in a way. It doesn't have to be cross-legged on the floor, doesn't it? Yeah, my mind's too active for that. I'm busy writing shopping lists and things like that when I meditate.
When you meditate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think when people start ruminating or whatever and they can't empty their busy mind, You can't think your way out of that. You have to use your body to do that.
Yeah.
You have to start using breathing. Breathing, interestingly, neurologically, we have lots of autonomic functions, automatic functions. We have no control over. They're automatic, literally, by their definition. But breathing, which is for the most part automatic, is the one thing we do have control over. So it's that kind of interface between you and the things that are making you feel unwell with stress, the autonomic excess, let's say. So I would recommend you focus on the breathing and not your list of shopping.
I did have a brain scan once. I didn't realise a PR friend had sent me this scan. She said, I can't find a journalist to go and do it. Will you do it? And it was at some kind of posh hotel in Knightsbridge, and I think you got a free something or other, glass of something. So I went.
Wow.
And at the end of all these tests, the scientist said to me, well, great news. I don't think you're going to get Alzheimer's, and I don't think this, that and the other. And I had no idea that I was being tested for this kind of thing, which would have been handy had I known, because I'm not sure I'd have gone through it all. Wow. But I remember saying to him, I'm not very patient with a book. I don't really chill. I've always got too many things going on. And we realised that my absolute calm is live television or skiing or something where you've got to focus on the job in hand. That's my best form of relaxation, which sounds a bit bonkers, really.
No, it's not at all.
Is it not?
It's funny when you say that, because you got me thinking when you asked me that question, what do I do to calm myself down? And most of the time I'm distracted by this, like almost term ADHD. I won't talk about that, because that's another
that's another episode.
I've got my views on that, but I won't. But the one thing where I feel at peace is when I have to focus during surgery, particularly the high complex stressful surgery.
Yeah.
And I'm completely in my zone.
I really understand
you are on TV.
Yeah. I mean, I know my job's not saving lives, but that was when I was absolutely calm.
Yeah.
But also the prep's gone in, and of course the prep's gone in your role as well. I'm sure you spent hours working out what you're going to do, and for me it was hours of research the night before and knowing exactly what I was going to do.
Yeah.
To look like the Swan, hopefully, on telly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I always look like that. What also keeps you busy, Kevin, is that you're chairman of the Brain Tumour Research Campaign, which is quite a small but very passionate charity. And that's got a real personal connection for you. Tell me how you got involved and founded it with lovely Wendy, who's in our studio today.
Yeah, it's small, but it gives a lot of bang for the buck. So Wendy's here, so I'm careful what I say. But, it comes from that connection with your patient, where Wendy and John were this most amazing people that came into my life. But unfortunately, John had the diagnosis of a brain tumour and presented in quite a bad way on his way back from Canada. And we ended up, he was diagnosed with a tumour on imaging. We ended up having to operate and then go through the process of radiation chemotherapy. But I stayed with them on their journey, because it was quite a torrid journey, lots of ups and downs, needing interventions and stuff to keep him back on track. But like all patients, eventually he lost that battle. But during the process and that pathway, we got to know each other very well. And one of the things that resounded through that was the common feeling that although they're bought into the process, and although I was and the oncologists were trying our best, it was still not enough, and other things needed to be done. And with that frustration and that need to want to do more, we thought, well, let's actually do something about it. And how best can we do it? And let's start with the basics. Let's start with bringing Wendy into the fold by, how can she play a role in this, apart from just telling everybody about this? And we can start raising money and start expanding on our ideas of what might need to be done in the sphere of research. So I had the advantage of working in the field and thinking, well, this is what we could do. These are where the pitfalls are. This is what we need to do better. And it's not going to be just a single silver bullet. It's going to be a multifaceted approach. It's going to need a lot of people working on it together. And Wendy's a great people's person. She's a great businesswoman, fundraiser. We used our talents mutually beneficially to bring the charity together.
And John sadly passed away at 52. Wendy describes John as her absolute soulmate, as well as her business partner and husband. And so incredible that something so positive can come out of tragedy like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's like, what do you do when something goes wrong? You learn from it and turn it into something positive. There's always a silver lining in something. There's always a lesson. There's always a direction. And this was a forced change, and most good things come out of forced changes, don't they? So we called it a campaign, actually, because we felt at that stage, back in 2003 or 4, there wasn't really much in the way of research going on. And we knew that we had a fight on our hands. We knew that there was a very nihilistic view about brain tumours, perhaps part of the problem as to why things weren't getting done, because what anybody had done at that stage hadn't really had a major impact on outcome and survival. So we called it a campaign for a reason, and we've been fighting it ever since.
And is brain tumour research still woefully underfunded, Kevin? And if so, why?
I think it's getting better. There's been a lot of campaigning pushed by Wendy, the BTRC and the umbrella charities. The one thing that happened, there seemed to be something in the air back in those days in the noughties where there were lots of little local charities emerging through the same criteria, and they all came together under that Brain Tumour Research umbrella. And one of the biggest campaigning issues was try and increase funding, because the charities could do so much, but it really needed backing of what I'd call the usual suspects, people doing research that weren't really pushing things forward or weren't really focused on it. And they weren't focused on it because in terms of pure numbers, there weren't that many people developing brain tumours. It's fairly rare, but the counter to that, it's devastating. It's like it is with a malignant tumour, it's virtually a death sentence. I mean, if you're lucky, some people are, and I've got patients that are, there's about a 2% cure rate, but that's nothing really. What BTRC, BTR and the collaboration of charities has done is lobby government in a very powerful way. And they are pushing money into it. At least the intention is there. There's a lot more political awareness. There's a lot more population awareness. And there's a lot more people raising funds for it. So it's just now important for us to direct those funds in the correct way.
And tell me about the research. I was chatting to Wendy before you arrived, and she was talking about sonar wands and true blood and all sorts of things, and then Raman something that I can't read on my writing. So where are we, Kevin? What things are happening in the brain tumour world that you're very pleased about and that you're helping with and championing in the research field?
Well, being a surgeon, obviously I'm at the front line, so I'm at the coalface when the patient first comes. They come to me. The first line of treatment and the mainstay of treatment, the most benefit from all the types of treatment they can have is still surgery, for better or worse. And that's because brain tumours are just not very vulnerable to targeted therapies like other cancers of breast and lung and prostate are. They're very what we call heterogeneous. They vary a great deal, even within a few millimeters of the tumour. There are different types of cells with different metabolic characteristics, genetic characteristics. So one of the things that I wanted to do was bring teams of people to try and improve the pathway of the patient from surgery and thereafter in a kind of stage way. So a bit like the British cycling team did, to improve every little bit in an incremental way to get an overall benefit. But of course, being a surgeon, I started with surgery. The first thing we did was assemble a basic science team to look at the tumours in a slightly different angle. So everybody had been focused on the genetic changes, which, don't always necessarily translate into how the tumour cells behave. They may be there, they may be part and parcel, but they may not reflect what's truly going on in terms of the cancer moving forward and being aggressive. So we started to look more at the metabolism, now more downstream things. And we now realise that a big part of cancer generation is metabolism. And the aberrant metabolism of tumours, that also makes them very vulnerable. So, you've heard about people intermittent fasting, the ketogenic diet. So if you starve tumours of glucose, then you make them very vulnerable because they really heavily prefer glutamine as a substrate for energy than, say, ketones. So if you can change that environment and manipulate them, what we call epigenetically, it changes how they express genes, how they progress, basically, and it makes them very vulnerable to even the standard of care, even more vulnerable to radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and everything else. So that's one thing that we kind of worked on. From my perspective, asking me the question, what we needed to do was we were gaining evidence that if you can excise these high-grade tumours, to get a benefit from that excision, you have to get as much out as you can. And of course, you then have to weigh that against the risk of causing a deficit. So you need to define that boundary, what we call the functional boundary between tumour and brain. And so I just decided to develop some tools to help me with that and to visualise the tumour and also to understand what I'm looking at, because often tumour looks a bit like normal brain. Am I going to take that? Is that normal brain? How am I going to work this out? So we've had old-fashioned ways of doing that by stimulating the brain electrically, but it's a very crude thing. And so we decided to add to that. And what we came up with is a few things. We've come up with a technique called hyperspectral imaging. So when you shine light at certain frequencies, you'll get a different absorption pattern depending on the frequencies. If you shine lots of frequencies, you'll get a pattern of absorption, what we call an optical cube of information. So with that, you can then segment out what's tumour, what's normal brain.
So Jeffrey might have shone a different colour, perhaps.
So you're augmenting your vision. So the idea is that in near real time, you can segment out what looks normal into what's actually abnormal and what's really normal. The other thing is that's a field view. So you need, the surgeon is a visual animal, so he needs that to help him identify where he should go. And then when he gets to the point where you're getting to the functional boundary, how do you determine that? So the key development we made was this Raman spectroscopy that you pointed out. So this is a way where, again, without even touching tissue, we've known for almost a century that light of a certain frequency, when a photon hits the electron cloud of a molecule, a certain percentage of that will interact with an electron and change energy. And therefore, when it scatters, it will be of a different frequency. And that frequency will be specific to that molecule. So if you can pick up that scattered light, you can tell what the molecular makeup is of that target tissue. So if you extrapolate that, you get a fingerprint, which is a fingerprint individual to that tissue. So you can tell tumour from normal brain, and you can tell what type of tumour. You can even tell down to molecular diagnostic level what would normally take you 2 or 3 weeks to find out from special histology and immunohistochemistry. So we suddenly had this tool in our hands that we could shine on the tissue and tell us whether it's tumour, even what type of tumour, down to the nth degree. So you can imagine you're a surgeon now who doesn't need to send a tissue to the lab. You can look at it and it can give you the information you need. So there's a few things that people don't realise. You are now able to study the live tumour, the live patient, which is where all the mistakes are happening in the lab, because all these models of studying cancers in the lab, that you can't really extrapolate them back into real life. All the tests that have been done in the lab, very few of them actually come up with real solutions when you feed it back into human clinical trials. So you can study that because there's something missing. So you can study something where everything is there, nothing's missing. The other thing is that you can shorten the diagnostic pathway, so you don't have to wait 2 weeks. You've got it instantly. So can I give some treatment there and then, as well as cutting it out? Can I give something else? And of course, I can give local treatment. I could give, depending on the molecular makeup, I could potentially, this isn't now, this is for the future, but this is a potential. I can put some chemotherapy in, I could get some genetic therapy in. So the sky's the limit. Suddenly you've created a huge opportunity.
That's extraordinary. And is some of what you were describing the sonar wand as well? Is that part of it?
That's part of the visualization using penetrative image. So it's using ultrasound during surgery to visualize beyond what you can see. So what I'm talking about is the surface and the surface, like the tissue that I'm touching. But the ultrasound is backing that up by looking much deeper.
Is it just you using all of this, Kevin, or have you managed to roll out this technology to other surgeons? Is it being widely used now?
Well, the ultrasound is more widely used. I mean, when I started using it 15, 20 years ago, we were the early adopters and developed it. There's hyperspectral imaging, is something that's rolling out in other centres now. But the Raman is something that really, it's one of those things that it's a very sensitive thing. So it's very prone to artifacts. So getting a robust prototype that gives reproducible results has been a problem for us. So that's something that's in development. It needs investment, but a lot of people are interested in it, and I think it will transform what we do if we can get it right. So we've done human trials. We've done human trials, yeah, and it can do what it says on the tin.
Wow, that's so exciting. Can we just finish by talking a bit about the brain itself? You've been a neurosurgeon for a long time now. You know, over the last couple of decades, we're all obsessed with our iPhones and Bluetooth speakers and things like that. Are you seeing an increase in brain tumours for those kind of reasons, do you think?
It's a good question. It'd be a bit controversial to say yes, but I mean, we are, as you say, being surrounded by more and more things that we can't see. And I believe more and more things that do interact with us biologically, you know, EM radiation. The very fact that I've just told you about the effects and the utility we've got of using light on tissue would suggest that there are things that are going on that we probably don't see or don't understand that may be accounting for some of this. But it does seem that brain tumours are generally on a steady increase for reasons we don't fully understand. Obviously, you know, diagnostic ability is improved, so detection rates are better. But I feel like I'm beginning again, like Davina. So I feel young, but
we are young, Kevin. You're no age at all.
But I've had a lot of experience in neurosurgery, and even in medicine, you do see pathologies evolve and change. You see things that were problems like 10 years ago, less of a problem now. You know, the classic thing is the biggest operation back in the 60s, 70s was, you know, a vagotomy for ulcers. Now we just take a tablet for ulcers to stop the acid production. But you do see things change, and I think they change because populations, environments change, and what we understand and how we develop and what we become as a phenotype, that's how we are, is a function of our genes and our environment. So I think the brain, for a start, as you say, there's a change in the physical environment and the electromagnetic environment, or the pollutant environment. You consider your brain like a computer and something that's developing all the time, adapting all the time. You know, the programming, let's say, the stimulation that we're receiving is we're being bombarded with stuff, and that can have a detrimental effect on you simply through the process of stress. And I think stress is one of those things that we have to have as a protection to adapt to environments. But if it's constantly, it then becomes detrimental. And I think we're now in an environment where we're very easily exposed to constant stress. of one form or another. That's partly why we're seeing tumours and cancers becoming the main predominant pathology these days.
Stress is a real killer, isn't it? And the other one I just wanted to mention briefly was microplastics. And I only mention that because we've just done a podcast with a marine biologist from Exeter University who's just returned from the Galapagos. She's been there 5 times and she studies the effect of microplastics on invertebrates. And some of them are microscopic and others are worms up to 3 meters long, apparently. And they're causing real problems in organisms in as far away as the Galapagos. And she said that when you walk on the pristine sand there now, you can hear a crunch.
Oh, really?
And the crunch is the plastic that's been washed in from other countries. So I wondered if that's anything you've seen, just because the microplastics are everywhere, aren't they? In the air and in the air we breathe. And has that been anything you've studied?
It's not actually, but it's in the back of my mind. For years, I was worried about drinking so much water from plastic bottles. Everything's turned to plastic. Everything we eat is covered in plastic. But as a surgeon, I don't see microplastics. I can't, even under a microscope, I can't see if they're getting into the system. But I assume that there are microplastics down to a molecular level that are in the system. How you associate them with pathology, I'm not sure. But our task must be to try and reduce that.
And to look after our brains and to reduce stress, I would imagine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How do you look after your brain? Just as above, music and chilling and...
Yeah, well, I think that there are a few balances in life that links general systemic health to brain health, and that is sleep. Sleep's vitally important. None of us probably get enough sleep, but if you're not sleeping well, you've got to work on that, and there are different ways, probably outside the remit of today. Exercise, which also is linked to sleep, good healthy sleep. Exercise is vital, so it doesn't matter whether you are a smoker, you've got this disease, that disease. If you exercise every day, you'll live longer than if you didn't. Diet, again, these are all vital, important things to get balanced. And that comes down to what you're just talking about, trying to avoid things that are synthetic or processed or wrapped up in too much of the wrong things. Try and eat as natural as you can and try and avoid too much sugar and sugary stuff. And then it comes down to having a good supportive environment, something you can go into and get peace, having people around you that are positive and not dragging you down, and having a sense of purpose. I'm very blessed in that respect. I've got a huge sense of purpose, but the key is getting balance of all of those things. And so you can't have one dominating the other.
You do have a massive sense of purpose, and I know you've helped hundreds and hundreds of people. I bet everybody just wants to be friends with you afterwards, do they? I mean, you save people's lives. That seems a really natural, and you're a lovely personality, obviously.
Thank you. Well, obviously.
Obviously. She's just digging herself out of a major hole as she's ending the podcast.
You're right. I mean, I do give a lot of my energy. I'm giving a lot of my energy to people. Even if I don't operate, some days I come back exhausted. I have to recharge. And I need a little bit of energy myself, so I get it in those ways. But you have to surround yourself by, I would say, the right energy, which is the right people, the right environment. Otherwise, you'll get sick and you won't be able to cope. No. And you won't be able to do your job.
No, well, we're glad that you can do your job. Yeah. And it's good to have you on the speed dial now, just in case.
Thank you.
I know you're a really humble man, Kevin, and thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule to be so open about the surgery of the Davina. I know it's with her blessing, and I think that'll help a lot of people. As I said at the beginning, it'll raise awareness and hopefully more funding for research. And next week we'll be talking to Wendy in our part 2. So thank you so much for coming.
An absolute pleasure.
Has it? Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, you brought me out of my shell a bit. I hope I haven't gone down too many rabbit holes.
Oh no, you didn't.
Waffled on.
No, you were excellent.
No, it was fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to consultant neurosurgeon Kevin O'Neill, the man Davina McCall credits for saving her life. Next week, in part 2 of this special, I'll be talking to Wendy Fulcher, whose husband John sadly died from a brain tumour, and he was only 52. John was a patient of Kevin's, as he said earlier, and we're going to find out more about the Brain Tumour Research Campaign and how and why Wendy and Kevin founded it. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with Wendy. Join me then.